Jonathan Blake stood before three royal gifts: a mining moon, a fleet command, and a cracked necklace no emperor should have noticed. The alien court waited for the human billionaire to choose power. Instead, he walked past wealth, past warships, and returned the necklace to an old servant whose grief had been turned into a test. Then he looked at the princess and said, "I rejected a test that needed her pain to measure my ambition. Welcome to Galactic Contact. I hope you enjoy this journey among the stars, and may your day be filled with happiness." Now, let the story begin. The three gifts hovered in the center of the glass crown hall, each held inside a column of silent gravity. A mining moon turned in the first, bright with silver ridges and refinery fire, the kind of world men called opportunity when they did not have to hear the workers beneath it breathe. A fleet command sigil burned in the second, 700 royal ships folded into a crystal no larger than a human thumb. In the third column hung a cracked necklace on faded cloth. Copper links. One missing blue stone. No projected value. No military purpose. No reason for the richest human alive to look at it twice. Jonathan Blake looked at it twice. Above him, the alien court waited in suspended tears beneath artificial stars, their robes spilling over crescent balconies, their translation halos whispering like expensive insects. 6 miles below the transparent floor, Sornai Prime glowed through blue evening clouds. The room had been designed to make distance feel natural. Nobles above, servants near the walls, candidates alone at the center, and the throne higher than all of them, glass-backed and empty behind a veil of cold light. Jonathan stood in a plain charcoal suit, 42 years old, white, steady, one hand resting near the scratched steel watch his father had worn while fixing freight elevators in Detroit. The watch looked cheap in that room. He kept it visible anyway. A herald lifted a ceremonial staff. Jonathan Blake of Earth will choose the gift by which he proves the worth of his rule. The word rule rolled through the hall and came back through the translator's polished thin. Someone above him murmured, "Earth money finally wants a crown." Jonathan did not look up. Wealth had taught him many things, but poverty had taught him the useful ones first. Fancy rooms liked to feed on reaction. He did not feed them. Princess Valara Sorn watched from behind the crystal veil, blue skin luminous beneath the oath light, silver-violet eyes narrowed into stillness. Her face was beautiful and unmistakably alien. High-sculpted cheekbones, subtle vertical pupils, pale lines of living light threading beneath her temples. She had seen governors choose territory, admirals choose weapons, princes choose whatever made them taller. She expected the human to reveal the shape of his hunger. Jonathan looked from the moon to the fleet, then back to the necklace. Near a rear pillar, an elderly servant in gray stood with both hands folded too tightly at her waist. She stared at the broken necklace with the discipline of someone trying not to reach for the last thing a dead child had touched. The missing blue stone matched a small bead tied at her wrist. Jonathan saw it. Valyra saw him see it. The court saw only a test waiting to be won. Lord Karen's voice slid from the dais, smooth as chilled oil. "Choose carefully, Mr. Blake. Each gift reveals the scale of the man." Jonathan stepped toward the third column. Confusion moved through the floating seats, soft and hungry. The gravity field scanned his hand, resisted for half a second, then released the necklace into his palm. It weighed almost nothing. The hall grew heavier. Jonathan crossed the floor toward the old servant. Guards shifted. Nobles leaned forward. The woman looked first to the princess, because fear had trained her longer than hope. Valyra's finger moved once against the arm of the dais. Permission, small enough for pride to survive. Jonathan stopped at arm's length and held the necklace out. "Ma'am," he said, quiet and plain, "I think this got misplaced." The servant took it with both shaking hands and pressed it to her chest. No applause came. Good. Applause would have made it smaller. Karen's voice sharpened behind him. "You have rejected dominion and defense for a damaged trinket." Jonathan turned back toward the dais, toward the throne, toward the princess behind the veil. "No," he said. "I rejected a test that needed her pain to measure my ambition." The artificial stars burned without blinking. For the first time since the human entered the hall, Valyra looked less like a judge and more like someone who had just discovered the test was judging her too. 6 hours before the Glass Crown Hall learned what a broken necklace could do to an empire, Jonathan Blake's diplomatic shuttle dropped through the upper clouds of Sornai Prime without escort, anthem, or golden convoy. It was a modest white craft with heat marks along the belly and dust still clinging to the landing struts from the orbital transfer lane. The alien press had expected theater. They had been promised the richest human alive, the man whose holdings crossed medicine, energy, transport, and half the commercial patents Earth liked to brag about in quiet rooms. They expected armored guards. They expected jeweled diplomats. They expected wealth to step out wearing its own weather. The hatch opened with a tired mechanical breath. Jonathan came down alone in a plain charcoal suit, carrying one leather folio and wearing a scratched steel watch under his cuff. For a second, the cameras drifted closer as if they had missed the real guest. A commentator whispered near an active translation halo. "That is the billionaire?" Jonathan adjusted his sleeve. "Depends who's asking." He did not stop for the cameras. The landing terrace spread beneath him in transparent stone, 6,000 feet above the Capitol. Blue towers rose through pale mist. Service skiffs moved between them in narrow lanes below the royal traffic, low, fast, almost invisible unless a man had spent enough of his life watching who did the lifting. Jonathan watched them for half a breath, then turned as a royal protocol officer approached in robes the color of wet iron. The officer's eyes settled slightly above Jonathan's face, where politeness could pretend it was not measuring him. "Mr. Blake, your arrival has been recognized by the Crown Archive. Your financial disclosures, corporate holdings, and diplomatic eligibility have been accepted under provisional candidate status." "That's a long way to say I'm allowed through the door." "Provisionally," the officer said. Doors love that word. The officer's mouth tightened. He lifted a translucent tablet, its text shifting from Sornai script into English. "Because you are an Earth citizen and a commercial national of significant standing, any sovereign compact offered to you is subject to Earth Trade Annex 19. It requires transparent consideration, non-coerced assent, and fraudulent consideration review before elevation." He pronounced the clause as if humans had brought mud into a temple and called it law. Jonathan took the tablet and read the section instead of pretending to understand it. "You put royal marriage under trade compliance. Your species insisted on the annex after the Europa mineral arbitration. Sounds like us." Above the terrace, hidden behind one-way crystal, Princess Vealara Sorn watched him pause on the legal language longer than he looked at the palace gates. Her blue fingers rested against the viewing pane, silver-violet eyes narrowing by the smallest degree. Beside her, Lord Karen stood with his hands tucked neatly inside his sleeves. "He reads like a clerk," Karen said. "Clerks notice where kings bleed ink," Vealara replied. Below, a young servant stepped forward with a tray of ceremonial entry tokens. She was slender, blue-gray, with a service band at her wrist and a limp she tried to bury under perfect posture. The tray dipped when her knee caught the raised edge of the landing seal. 3 crystal tokens slid toward the rim. Jonathan reached out and steadied the tray with 2 fingers. Not dramatic, not possessive, just enough pressure to give the weight back to her safely. "Rough floor," he said. The servant blinked. "It is perfectly level, sir." "Then it's arrogant." Her mouth almost smiled before training closed it. The protocol officer's voice cooled. "Service staff are not part of candidate evaluation." Jonathan selected 1 token and waited until the servant's grip had recovered before letting go. "Everything in a room is part of evaluation." The officer looked as though the sentence had touched something unsanitary. Jonathan moved on through the inner gate, past suspended portraits of dead monarchs whose eyes followed him by optical courtesy. He did not bow to them. A young nobleman blocked his path with a bright public smile. "Mr. Blake, is it true humans believe wealth can replace lineage?" Jonathan stopped just long enough to give the insult a place to land. "No, we believe wealth is a poor substitute for character, but a useful way to find out who's selling theirs." The nobleman's smile froze. Cameras lowered by half an inch. Behind the crystal, Vealara kept watching. He had not performed humility. He had not performed power. He had noticed the service routes, the servant's limp, the legal annex, and the insult inside the welcome. That did not make him worthy. Not yet. It made him difficult to price. Vealara turned from the glass as the palace bells began their low metallic call. "Seat him lower than the others at banquet," she said. Karen inclined his head. "A humiliation?" Veolara watched Jonathan disappear beneath the portraits of kings who had never met rent. A measurement. The banquet hall turned rank into altitude with mechanical patience. 12 crescent tables floated around the central dais, each one suspended lower than the last, so bloodline, office, and money became visible by the inch. Jonathan Blake's place waited on the lowest arc, beneath a spice magnate with jewel-capped teeth and a junior admiral whose medals clicked against his plate whenever he breathed. His chair sat 3 inches lower than the next candidate's. His glass carried a gray rim, the kind assigned to staff during festival service. The insult had engineering behind it. Jonathan noticed the height, the glass, the cameras hidden in the flower stems, and the narrow servant lane behind his chair. Then he sat down. Across the room, nobles waited for anger. They got posture. Behind the crystal veil above the banquet floor, Princess Veolara Sorn watched with one blue hand resting against the pane. Lord Karen stood beside her, still as a signature at the bottom of a dangerous page. He understands the seating, Karen said. Yes. Then he will protest. Veolara followed Jonathan's eyes as they moved from the noble tiers to the service doors. Not yet. Below, an elderly servant in gray entered with a tray balanced against one thin shoulder. Maravasu. Veolara knew the name from the offering files she had reviewed before dawn, when the palace was quiet enough for guilt to have a voice. The cracked necklace selected for the crown test had come from Mara's family through service forfeiture. Every ceremonial offering required a chain of custody witness, not because royal law honored servants, but because inventory had to be authenticated before it could be used in sacred theater. Mara's thumbprint sat in the archive as proof. Proof of origin, not proof of consent. The distinction had sat under Veolara's ribs all day. Mara crossed the lowest aisle with careful steps. Her left knee trembled under the tray's weight. A nobleman beside Jonathan noticed and moved his sleeve away from the risk of spilled sauce. Jonathan moved his chair, only half an inch at first, then another. He rose without ceremony, placed 2 fingers under the tray's heavy edge, and shifted the balance off her shoulder before the tremor became failure. Bad angle, he said. Mara froze. Sir, the table is level. Then the table's lying. The junior admiral gave a dry laugh. That table was crafted by imperial artisans. Jonathan glanced at the overloaded dishes, then at the tight servant lane. They forgot knees. A few translation halos stuttered. Someone coughed too late to hide amusement. Mara stared at the floor, caught between terror and relief. Jonathan stepped back before help could become performance. He did not ask her name in front of people who would punish her for being noticed. He simply turned his chair with his foot, opening a cleaner path, and sat again as if nothing worth praising had happened. Veolara's temple lights pulsed once beneath her blue skin. 47 candidates had eaten in that room before him. One had offered to purchase a servant's debt as a wedding gesture. Another had called bonded labor cultural discipline. Most had looked through the staff completely, except when a cup went empty. Jonathan had seen the limp, the bad lane, the weight, and the insult built into his own place setting. A noblewoman across from him lifted her crystal cup. Mr. Blake, what does loyalty cost on earth? Jonathan turned the gray-rimmed glass once and set it down untouched. Depends who's selling it. And yours? Not on the market. The answer did not flatter the table. That was why it lasted. Behind the veil, Karen leaned closer. He has practiced restraint. Veolara looked past Jonathan to the service ledger near the wall, where Mara pressed her thumb to a green strip confirming delivery. The same format as the forfeiture record. The same quiet key the court used every day without respecting the hand that held it. No, Veolara said. He has practiced noticing. The plates withdrew minutes later, sinking soundlessly into the table seams. Mara crossed behind Jonathan again, and the aisle remained open because his chair still held its new angle. He never looked up to see whether the princess had seen. That was what Veolara carried with her when the banquet lights dimmed and the first oath columns began rising from the floor. The human had not spent kindness toward the crown. He had spent it where the crown had trained itself not to look. When the banquet lights dimmed, the room changed its purpose without changing its face. The crescent tables withdrew into the walls. Crystal plates sank through hidden seams. The noble tiers lifted half an inch, just enough to remind everyone that judgment preferred a better view. Servants slipped out through side passages with trained silence. But Mara remained near the service ledger, gray sleeves folded against her ribs, one thumb still faintly green from the delivery strip. Jonathan Blake stood where the lowest table had been, alone on the central pane, the city of Sornai Prime glowing far beneath his shoes. Above him, the artificial stars tightened into oath light. Princess Veilira descended from behind the crystal veil, without music. Up close, she looked less like a royal portrait and more like a living contradiction. Blue skin luminous under court light, silver-violet eyes steady, pale threads beneath her temples pulsing with something too biological to be jewelry. Lord Karen walked at her right shoulder, smooth as a man approaching a result he had already signed. 3 gravity columns rose from the floor. This time, Jonathan did not see gifts. He saw contracts wearing perfume. The first column opened around the mining moon, its surface mapped in bright mineral veins, refinery estimates stacking upward in elegant curves. Beneath the profit display, a small line blinked in English, bonded workforce reassignment eligible under Royal Development Grant. Jonathan read it, then looked away. The second column unfolded the fleet's sigil into 700 miniature ships, each route traced in defensive blue. Escort authority, emergency taxation, command access. Then the hidden weight, council-administered stabilization debt, until coronation review. A leash made of admirals and signatures. The third column barely tried to impress the room. The cracked necklace turned slowly on faded cloth, copper links dulled by years against skin. Its registry note appeared only when Jonathan stepped close. Forfeited under ceremonial offering rights. Palace Service Line 8. Mara Vasu. Widow. Hereditary debt class. Chain of custody witness attached. Jonathan glanced toward Mara. She had gone still in the way people did when their private dead were brought into public lighting. Veilira watched his face instead of the necklace. Karen watched his hands. The candidate will select one offering, Veilira said. The civic record will preserve the choice as evidence of governing instinct. Jonathan kept his eyes on the registry note. Does the record preserve why an offering was taken? A murmur passed through the upper tiers. Karen answered first. The record preserves lawful transfer. That wasn't the question. Veilira's expression did not change, but the light under her temples quickened. Not always, she said. The honesty entered softly and made the room colder. Jonathan stepped past the moon. Its profit curve followed him for a second, still trying to sell itself. He stepped past the fleet, and the command routes dimmed like pride losing oxygen. At the third column, the field scanned his hand, confirmed Earth candidate clearance, and dropped the necklace into his palm. It weighed less than his father's watch, less than a bad clause, less than the silence around Mara. Jonathan crossed the central pane. Guards shifted. The old servant looked to Veilira first, because fear had taught her where permission lived. Veilira gave the smallest nod. Jonathan stopped far enough away that Mara had to choose to reach. This belongs with someone who knows what's missing, he said. Mara took the necklace with both hands. Copper touched the service band at her wrist, and for one sharp second the whole court could see grief beside debt. Karen stepped forward. Mr. Blake has rejected dominion and defense for a personal relic without strategic value. Jonathan turned back. No, I rejected a room that needed a widow's grief to make ambition look noble. A noble above him whispered, sentiment. Jonathan looked up. If that's your word for noticing pain, your translators need work. Karen's smile thinned. A ruler chooses its scale. Scale without conscience is just damage with better funding. Veilira's composure held, but not cleanly. The test had been hers. The machinery around it had not been. For the first time, that difference looked less like protection and more like an excuse. Jonathan looked from the moon to the fleet, then to the empty column where the necklace had hung. Those first 2 gifts had debt language attached. Karen went almost still. Almost was enough. Jonathan lifted his gaze to Veilira. Show me the compact that made them legal. Beneath the transparent floor, the civic archive answered with a low blue pulse, and the palace began to reveal what ceremony had been hiding. The blue pulse rose from beneath the transparent floor and opened into law. Not a scroll, not a book. A civic archive, quantum-stamped, witness-linked, older than the throne and colder than any living hand that had signed it. Lines of Sornai script unfolded in the air, then bent into English around Jonathan Blake as the translation lattice struggled to make royal language behave like a contract. He stood still and read. The court watched him the way predators watched a locked door begin to click from the wrong side. Princess Valara remained on the lower step of the dais, close enough to the archive light for the pale threads beneath her temples to glow silver through blue skin. Lord Karen stood beside her, smooth again, but the smoothness had tension under it now. The first clause expanded around the image of the mining moon. Resource Dominion Acceptance. Development Stewardship. Labor Continuity. Council Revenue Oversight. Jonathan raised one hand and enlarged the footnote nobody had expected him to touch. Bonded workforce obligations transfer to candidate-held development office under council administration. He read the line once, then looked at the moon still turning in its column. So if I chose the moon, I didn't get a gift. I got workers I couldn't free without your approval. Karen's voice stayed polite. A ruler inherits responsibilities. That's a clean word for other people's chains. A few translation halos hesitated before carrying the sentence upward. The second clause opened around the fleet sigil. Emergency guardianship. Defensive command. Escort authority. Border taxation. Jonathan followed the legal thread down until it became smaller and uglier. Council-administered stabilization debt attached until coronation review. Candidate subject to continuity guidance during succession uncertainty. And if I chose the fleet, he said, I owed command debt before I ever commanded anything. Karen folded his hands and sighed his sleeves. Power without supervision is instability. Jonathan glanced at him. Supervision that owns the vote is possession. The archive brightened as if the word vote had triggered a deeper layer. Lines rearranged. A new section appeared near the center of the compact. Consort Dependency Review. The English flickered twice, then settled. Candidate accepting council-administered asset may be classified dependent for 3 royal cycles. Dependent consort vote may be proxied under continuity supervision. Queen's refusal of proxy alignment may constitute instability petition. The hall lost its little noises. Even the suspended seats seemed to hold still. Jonathan read the section slower, not for himself, but for everyone who had trusted height more than language. The gift creates debt. Debt creates dependency. Dependency lets the council proxy the consort. If the queen refuses, you call her unstable. He turned toward Valara, not accusing her, not rescuing her, just placing the truth where both of them could see it. That isn't a marriage compact. It's a machine for building a puppet king beside an ornamental queen. The word ornamental struck the dais like metal dropped in a quiet room. Valara did not flinch. Her eyes moved from the claws to Karen, and something old in her expression closed a door. These provisions were not in my father's compact, she said. Karen lowered his head with perfect sorrow. Your father's death required adaptation. He was dead, she said. He did not require anything. A murmur moved through the court, thin and frightened. Karen let it pass before speaking. Foreign candidates often mistake stabilizing governance for coercion. Jonathan tapped the dependency clause with 2 fingers. No, we've got a word for this on Earth too. Karen's eyes cooled. And what word is that? Takeover. Valara stepped fully off the dais. The empty throne waited behind her, polished and high, but she did not turn toward it. She touched the compact with her own hand. Blue archive light brightened around her fingertips, recognizing bloodline authority before council preference could interfere. Show amendment history. Karen's stillness sharpened. Unnecessary. Jonathan tilted his head. Funny how that word shows up right before evidence. Several nobles looked down at their hands. Valara heard the small movement and understood it. Doubt had entered the room, but doubt was not proof. Proof needed a door. She lifted her chin. Show the history. The archive flickered. For one breath, it almost obeyed. Then the blue light drained into a pale institutional white that crawled outward through the floor seams and up the base of the throne. The translation halos snapped into official mode. Suspended seats locked with tiny magnetic clicks. Karen opened his palm, and a second seal appeared over the compact. Continuity review invoked. Valara turned slowly toward him. On what authority? Protection of the realm, he said. And protection of an heir whose judgment has become visibly compromised. Jonathan looked at the white light spreading around Valara's boots. then at the advisor who had stopped pretending the test was about him. "There it is," he said quietly. Veilira did not ask what he meant. The trap had finally stepped out of ceremony and called itself law. The pale institutional light spread through the chamber with the quiet confidence of a system that had been obeyed too long. It ran along the floor seams, climbed the dais, and wrapped the throne's base in geometric bands that looked almost beautiful until they refused their own princess. Veilira took one step toward the seat. The light rose before her knees in a thin hexagonal barrier, transparent, polite, absolute. No guards touched her. No weapon appeared. The palace simply denied her with perfect manners. Jonathan Blake watched the barrier form and thought of every contract he had ever seen that used soft words to do hard damage. Lord Caron stood beside the archive seal, his robe catching the new light until he seemed less like an advisor than an extension of the room. "Continuity review has begun," he said. "Your Highness will remain outside active succession authority until council confidence is restored." Veilira's silver-violet eye stayed on him. "My father granted emergency authority for 30 days. The emergency outlived the calendar. Or you taught it to." The sentence cut cleanly because she did not raise her voice. Caron opened a second document above the compact. The continuity addendum unfolded in compact blocks of language, less ceremonial than the marriage clauses, more surgical. Candidate disruption. Public degradation of sovereign tradition. Manipulation of service grievance. Foreign interference. Protective review of heir judgment. Jonathan stepped closer, not in front of Veilira, only beside the projection where the text could not hide behind distance. He had learned not to stand between a woman and her own name. Manipulation of service grievance, he read. His eyes moved to Mara, still by the ledger with the necklace held against her chest. "That's what you call returning stolen property." Caron's mouth tightened. "You call everything theft when you dislike the lawful owner." "No, I call it theft when someone else paid the price." A low murmur passed through the tiers and died quickly. Veilira heard it. So did Caron. He touched the addendum, enlarging the authorization seal at the bottom. This mechanism preserved the realm after the late king's passing. Jonathan looked at the seal code. Not the headline, not the speech. The code. Small numbers nested beneath ceremonial script. Revision hashes layered like sediment. "Show revision log," he said. Caron's eyes shifted. "You have no authority to request archive history." "I wasn't requesting." Jonathan glanced at Veilira. Original bloodline authority should still have access unless tribunal mode has fully activated. "This is pre-review." He rushed it. Veilira's pale temple lights brightened beneath her blue skin. She moved her hand over the seal. A needle of blue scanned her palm, then her pulse, then the faint bioluminescent rhythm under her skin. The archive hesitated. The room seemed to hold its expensive breath. Revision log displayed. Dates opened across the air. 12 days after the king's death, dependency provisions expanded. During Veilira's off-world funeral rites, council proxy authority extended. While the heir was marked medically unavailable for grief stabilization, service offering challenges restricted. Jonathan read the last phrase twice. Grief stabilization. It was the kind of term people invented when they wanted cruelty to wear a doctor's coat. Veilira stared at the dates. Her face did not break. Something behind it went very still. "I was burying my father," she said. Caron inclined his head. The realm required continuity. The realm required a queen who was not being edited while she mourned. The archive glow trembled around that sentence. Mara made a small sound when the service offering restriction brightened. Jonathan looked from the line to the green stain on her thumb, then to the necklace. The pieces snapped together with a quiet violence. "That's why the offering records were locked down," he said. "You weren't protecting tradition. You were cutting witnesses out of the system." Caron's composure hardened at the word witnesses. Veilira noticed the reaction. Jonathan noticed her noticing. The bridge between them was still thin, built from evidence instead of trust, but it held. Caron closed his hand. The revision log collapsed into a compact crystal suspended inside a tight gravity cage. Around the chamber, the outer thresholds sealed one by one with low magnetic thuds instead of ceremony. The court was no longer watching a test. It was trapped inside one. "Continuity seal," Caron ordered. "No external transmission. No archive duplication. No further interpretation by the foreign candidate." The last door locked. Above the floor, the crystal burned white and silent. Veilira turned to Jonathan, no longer judge, no longer veiled princess, but a woman standing beside the remains of a rigged inheritance. "What did you see?" she asked. Jonathan's eyes moved to Mara's stained thumb, then to the locked archive, then back to Karen. "A lock," he said, and the person he forgot was still holding the key. The sealed chamber did not shrink around them. It clarified. The noble tiers, the throne barrier, the dead transmission drones nested near the artificial stars, the compact crystal burning inside its gravity cage. Everything became easier to understand once no one could pretend the room was neutral. Jonathan Blake stood near the center pane with his hands loose at his sides, his father's watch catching a thin strip of archive light. Princess Veilira Sorn followed his gaze toward Mara, who held the cracked necklace against her chest, as if warmth alone could keep it from being taken again. The old servant's thumb still carried a faint green stain from the delivery ledger. Not decoration, not accident. Proof. Karen saw their attention shift and moved first. "Service records are administrative," he said. "They carry no succession authority." Jonathan looked at him. "Then you won't mind opening them." The counselor's face stayed smooth. His silence did not. Veilira stepped down from the edge of the blocked dais. The institutional light resisted around her boots, but it did not stop her from crossing to Mara. Without the veil, without the height, the princess looked more alien and more real. Blue skin luminous under the archive glow, silver-violet eyes sharp with a grief that had finally found direction. "Mara Vasu," she said. "Do you still have the forfeiture strip?" Mara's fingers tightened around the necklace. "Your Highness, it's only a receipt." "Receipts are what systems leave behind when they think no one can read them," Jonathan said. Mara reached into the inner seam of her sleeve and drew out a narrow strip of translucent green film, folded so many times it had learned the shape of her fear. Up close, faint geometry moved inside it. Inventory hash, biometric salt, oath timestamp, one old thumbprint preserved in quantum ink. The same kind of strip the palace used to prove a goblet, a banner, or a dead child's necklace had entered sacred custody without being swapped or forged. Veilira accepted it with both hands. Not like a queen taking tribute, like a witness receiving evidence. "Did you consent to Ari's necklace entering the Crown Test archive?" The name Ari had not been spoken in the hall before. Mara's mouth trembled around it. She looked toward Karen by reflex. Jonathan shifted half a step, changing the angle without blocking her view, taking the counselor's shadow off her face. Mara breathed in. No, the word was small. The archive heard it anyway. The forfeiture strip lit amber, then gold. Chain of custody dispute detected. Service witness reconciliation required before continuity seal may complete. The gravity cage around the compact crystal flickered. A sound moved through the suspended tiers, less like shock than 100 people realizing a door had always been hidden in the servant entrance. Karen stepped forward. "A coerced statement during active review is inadmissible." Veilira did not look at him. "Archive, verify physiological stress markers at time of forfeiture." The strip projected a faded record. Mara's pulse too high, cortisol markers elevated by Sornai standards, consent field marked procedural default. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Default consent. That's a fancy way to steal from someone too poor to say no. Karen's voice sharpened. The human's interpretation is irrelevant. Then why does the system keep agreeing with me? Veilira guided Mara's thumb to the active corner of the strip. "Only if you choose." Mara looked at the necklace, at the missing blue stone, at the princess holding the strip steady instead of the system holding her still. She pressed her thumb down. The gravity cage opened. The compact crystal split into layers of light, and the amendment history rose into the artificial stars. Council proxy clauses, debt routes, service offering restrictions, security pension diversions. Karen's custodial seal repeated again and again until authority began to look like handwriting caught at the scene. Nobles leaned back from their own names. Guards stared upward at pension lines they had never been told were leveraged. The chamber had become its own witness. Veilira stood beside Mara beneath the exposed record. She did not smile. Proof was not victory. Proof was a wound with better lighting. "Archive," she said. "Identify author of service offering restriction." The stars rearranged. Custodial author, Lord Karen Vell. Karen's softness vanished. He looked not at Veilira, but at Jonathan. Evidence is not authority, Mr. Blake. If you want emergency tribunal review, a recognized candidate must enter sovereign bond. Veilira went still. Jonathan heard the trap close around the truth before he saw its shape. Karen's voice lowered, almost kind. To save her throne, you must bind yourself to the compact you despise. The words sovereign bond turned the chamber colder than the archive light. The exposed amendments still burned across the artificial stars. Karen's name repeated in civic gold beside debt routes, proxy clauses, and service restrictions, yet the system waited as if truth alone could not move without a permitted hand. Jonathan Blake looked at the compact crystal, then at Princess Veilira Sorn. She did not explain quickly. That was how he knew the trap had teeth. Karen lifted one hand, and a signature band unfolded beneath the crystal, bright, elegant, hungry. Only a bonded candidate may petition emergency tribunal review, he said. Mr. Blake may sign, assume provisional consort authority, and place all evidence before the tribunal before sunrise. Jonathan kept his eyes on the band. And the cost? Karen's smile thinned. Administrative stabilization until coronation. Council debt. Temporary guidance. A collar with a calendar. The translation halos carried it upward, awkward and sharp. Some nobles looked away. Veilira stepped toward Jonathan, the block dais glowing behind her like a warning from a machine pretending to be destiny. Don't sign. No command. No royal performance. Just a woman refusing to let rescue become another form of ownership. Jonathan turned to her. For a moment, the hall, the gifts, the throne, the entire alien empire narrowed to that one clean refusal. She would rather risk the crown than let him enter the cage built for her. That mattered. He slipped the scratched steel watch from his wrist. The clasp clicked open, small and human in a room full of ancient systems. He set it on the central pane beside the signature band. My father fixed freight elevators in Detroit, he said. He taught me the worst contracts don't steal your money first. They make you grateful for the rope. Karen gave a soft laugh. Sentiment again. Jonathan picked up the stylus. Mara's hands closed around Ari's necklace. Veilira did not breathe. Jonathan did not touch the bond line. He turned the stylus sideways and tapped the lower corner of the compact, where the Earth provisions had been folded under diplomatic compliance. Open Annex 19. The archive hesitated, then obeyed. Plain English expanded through the air. Transparent consideration, non-coerced assent, fraudulent consideration review before elevation. Independent challenge rights for Terran commercial nationals. The protocol officer's board warning from the landing terrace returned now with teeth. Jonathan highlighted the final subsection. A disputed compact that materially conceals obligations affecting consent can be challenged by an Earth citizen before elevation. He looked at Karen. I haven't elevated. I refused the bond. And you hid the obligations. Karen stepped forward. Earth annexes cannot override sovereign law. They don't have to. Your compact incorporated my Earth status when you invited my money into your crown test. Jonathan tapped the first archive page. You wanted Earth wealth recognized. That means Earth consent rules came with it. The compact crystal pulsed blue, then gold. Candidate refusal entered. Sovereign bond declined. Fraudulent consideration review activated under Earth Trade Annex 19. Disclosure challenge accepted. Candidate remains unbound. Air authority preserved pending tribunal. The signature band dissolved into harmless light. The barrier behind Veilira weakened, not gone, but no longer absolute. Around the chamber, guards looked up at the pension diversions still shining among the evidence. One removed his council badge and placed it on the floor. Another followed. Then another. Not rebellion. Correction. Karen stood beneath a sky full of his own handwriting and watched obedience become audited. Jonathan bent, picked up his father's watch, and fastened it back around his wrist. Veilira looked at him across the open compact, her silver-violet eyes bright, with something too dangerous to cheapen into gratitude. You could have ruled 3 systems by sunrise, she said. Jonathan adjusted the scratched watch face until it sat straight. I don't sign contracts that make people smaller in the fine print. The glass crown hall did not cheer when the signature band vanished. Cheering would have made truth sound finished, and nothing finished had happened yet. The artificial stars still carried Karen's amendments in civic gold. Debt routes, proxy authorities, service restrictions, pension diversions, every careful theft hanging above the court with the calm of evidence that no longer needed permission. The compact crystal hovered open in the center of the chamber. Truth had entered the record. Justice still needed a hand steady enough to write the next line. Princess Valara Sorn stood before the weakened barrier, blue skin lit by archive glow, silver-violet eyes fixed not on the throne behind her, but on Mara. The old servant held Ari's necklace with both hands, the cracked copper chain trembling against her gray sleeves. "Your daughter's full name," Valara said. Mara blinked as if the question itself had crossed a forbidden border. "Ari Vasu, Your Highness." Valara lowered her head once. Not a court bow. Something smaller. Heavier. Archive, attach Ari Vasu to the disputed offering record. Mark forfeiture void pending tribunal. The civic system chimed. Offering record amended. Service debt enforcement suspended. Valara raised her hand, and the gold light spread through the chamber in clean bands. All hereditary service debts tied to ceremonial offerings are frozen pending civil audit. All chain of custody witnesses will receive tribunal notice, independent counsel, and public record protection. The words moved through the hall without ornament. That made them harder to dismiss. Karen's voice cut in, thinner now, but still polished. "Your Highness mistakes emotion for governance." Jonathan Blake stood several yards away and said nothing. He had opened the door. This step belonged to her. Valara turned toward Karen. The pale lines beneath her temples burned softly under her skin. "No, I am correcting governance that mistook injury for stability." The archive accepted the order. Tribunal mode activated. The suspended tiers released with a sequence of low mechanical clicks. Noble seats descended. Guard platforms settled. Service ledgers rose from the walls. Within seconds, the room that had measured worth by height brought everyone to the same level. A countess's silk hem brushed the floor beside a servant's work boots. A security captain stood eye to eye with the clerk whose pension line had been hidden in Karen's debt routes. No one called it justice yet. Eye level was only the beginning. But for a room built on altitude, it was enough to make shame visible. One guard removed his council badge and placed it on the central pane. Another followed. Then another. Small pieces of borrowed power made small, exact sounds. Karen did not resist. The civic seal at his collar dimmed, not by force, but by revocation. Power leaving through paperwork looked almost quiet enough to be mistaken for dignity. Hours later, after tribunal summons had gone out across Sornai Prime and the palace reopened to the evening wind, Jonathan stood on the western landing terrace beside his modest shuttle. The capital glowed below, blue towers threaded with service routes now marked by public audit beacons. Not freedom. Not yet. But a map mattered to people who had been told there was no road. Mara waited near the archway with Ari's necklace at her throat. The missing blue stone was still missing. Jonathan liked that. Some restorations lied when they pretended nothing had been broken. Valara joined him without crown, veil, or armored mantle. In the open air, she looked more alien and more herself. Blue-skinned, luminous, tired, unhidden. "You are leaving before the first hearing," she said. "Outside witnesses carry more weight if they stay outside." "Convenient. I've been called worse by better lawyers." A faint warmth touched her mouth and disappeared before the cameras could steal it. She held out the stylus he had used to activate Annex 19. "The archive wants this filed." Jonathan looked at it, then set it on the public rail between them. "Then file it where people can see what it did." Valara followed the gesture, quiet for a long second. "They are calling you the uncrowned king." Jonathan adjusted the scratched steel watch on his wrist. "Courts like expensive mistakes. Is that all you think it is?" He looked down at the service skiffs moving through the audit lights, no longer quite invisible. "I think I returned a necklace and refused a bad contract. That is not how Sornai will remember it." "Then make sure Sornai remembers Mara too." The shuttle hatch opened behind him. Valara did not ask him to stay. He did not ask her to leave. Some choices were only free if no one dressed them as destiny. Jonathan stepped onto the ramp and touched 2 fingers to his father's watch. Below the terrace, the palace lights shifted from institutional white to an uneven royal blue, imperfect and alive. Valara stood beneath the first stars with the throne behind her and her people before her. And as the human billionaire left without crown, bond, fleet, or moon, she understood why the hall had named him king. He had seen power offered in every beautiful disguise, and chosen the one thing no empire could afford to fake. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Galactic Contact for more powerful stories among the stars. May your day be peaceful, bright, and filled with wonder.